It was a bright, chilly afternoon in Manhattan, the wind brushing through the trees lining the streets, carrying the scent of fresh coffee and New York's bustling energy. The streets, as always, were filled with people, businessmen hurrying to meetings, tourists snapping photos, and families enjoying a weekend stroll. But at the Trump Tower, an atmosphere of tension hung in the air. Inside the grand lobby, a gathering of high-profile socialites, reporters, and political figures had come together for a press event, one that had been carefully orchestrated for months. Melania Trump, the former First Lady of the United States, was to make a rare appearance, stepping into the spotlight after years of maintaining a more private life. The press had been buzzing about her decision to return to the public eye, speculating on her thoughts regarding her husband's political career, her personal life, and what she had been doing since leaving the White House. The event was meant to be a grand affair. Melania, poised and elegant, stood at the center of the room, surrounded by cameras and flashing lights. Her designer dress, a soft shade of pastel blue, hugged her frame perfectly, her blonde hair cascading down her back in soft waves. The world knew her as the former First Lady, but in this moment, she was just another woman stepping back into the spotlight. Her face, although calm and composed, showed a glimmer of weariness, perhaps a sign of the pressure that came with being under the scrutiny of the media for so long. The event was going smoothly, with a gentle hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the rustling of people in hushed discussions. But as the cameras flashed and the questions began to flow, things took a sudden turn. A reporter, known for his controversial and cutting remarks, stood up from the crowd, his voice slicing through the calm atmosphere like a blade. "Mrs. Trump, people have been wondering, how does it feel to be the wife of someone who led such a divisive administration? How do you live with the choice you made? Standing beside a man who's been labeled as a racist, a sexist, and a controversial figure in the eyes of many." The words were laced with disdain, a deliberate jab aimed at triggering a reaction. Melania's face remained stone cold for a moment. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward her. It was clear that the question was not just about her personal views, but was a calculated attempt to provoke, to undermine her position, and force her into a defensive stance. The tension in the room thickened, the air growing heavy with anticipation. She had been silent for so long, but this moment, this question, was different. For a brief second, Melania's eyes flickered. There was a hint of discomfort, but her expression quickly masked it. The press had expected a defensive response, perhaps a sharp retort or a calculated response that would satisfy the media's hunger for conflict. But instead, something unexpected happened. She took a slow, deliberate step backward, her high heels clicking against the polished marble floor. The cameras captured every moment, but she was already moving, her eyes locked onto the exit. Without a word, Melania Trump turned and walked out of the room, leaving the crowd behind, stunned and silent. The reporters who had once eagerly awaited her answers were now left with nothing but empty air and confusion. As Melania exited the building, the crowd that had gathered outside to catch a glimpse of her seemed oblivious to the weight of what had just transpired. But for those inside, it was as though the world had shifted. They had expected the usual political dance, the rehearsed answers, and the composure that had become synonymous with her public image. But what they got was something different, something raw, something that spoke louder than any words could. The streets outside Trump Tower were filled with flashing lights, the rumble of traffic, and the shouts of reporters scrambling to gather their thoughts. In the space of just a few minutes, Melania Trump had gone from being the center of attention to becoming the subject of whispered conversations and frantic headlines. The cameras that had captured her every move now turned to follow her departure. The media frenzy, the ever-present swarm of reporters and photographers, rushed toward her, their eyes now filled with curiosity, disbelief, and something else, respect. But Melania did not stop. She kept walking, her long strides confident yet purposeful. She made her way toward a black SUV, but before she could open the door, a voice called out from behind her, "Mrs. Trump, can you please give us a statement?" A reporter's voice echoed through the street, But Melania didn't turn. She kept walking, her expression unreadable. She reached the car, and just as she was about to climb into the vehicle, she paused. Something in her changed. Perhaps it was the weight of the moment. Perhaps it was a desire to finally speak out after years of being under the microscope. Whatever it was, she turned around. "All right," she said, her voice calm but powerful. "I will speak." But only for a moment. The reporters stopped in their tracks. They had expected a brief answer, a soundbite, perhaps even a bitter remark. Instead, they were met with something unexpected. Melania stood tall, her posture exuding a quiet strength, her gaze fixed on the crowd before her. "I have lived in the shadows for too long. But today, I walk out not because I am ashamed, but because I refuse to be the subject of ridicule and judgment any longer," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of silence. "People have always tried to define me based on who I am married to, but I am my own person," she continued, her words slow and deliberate. "I am not a reflection of anyone else's choices. I am not defined by anyone's labels. I walk out today not in anger, but in defiance. I am reclaiming my voice." For the first time, the press, those who had followed her every move, scrutinized her every word, was left speechless. This was not the Melania Trump they had come to know, the one who stood by her husband's side with quiet composure. This was a woman who had chosen to reclaim her narrative, to step out from the shadow of public perception and declare that she was more than just the wife of a controversial figure. Her words lingered in the air, powerful and poignant. As she turned to enter the vehicle, the media remained in stunned silence. But then, something unexpected happened. A young woman in the crowd, one of the many who had gathered to watch, stepped forward. She was holding a bouquet of white lilies, her expression soft but determined. She made her way toward Melania, who had not yet closed the door of the SUV. "I just wanted to say thank you," the young woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "You don't know how much it means to see someone like you stand up, not for your husband, but for yourself." Melania looked at her for a moment, her eyes softening. She reached out, taking the bouquet in her hands, her fingers gently brushing against the young woman's hand. "Thank you," Melania whispered, her voice quiet but sincere. The car door slammed shut, and the vehicle pulled away, leaving behind a stunned crowd and a media that had just witnessed an act of defiance and empowerment, one that would leave its mark on the world. The world watched in the days that followed as the headlines from New York City spread across the globe. Melania Trump's walkout and the powerful words she spoke resonated deeply, not just within the political circles, but among everyday people as well. Social media was flooded with discussions, many praising her for finally speaking out, for reclaiming her own voice and standing up for herself in a world that had so often tried to define her. The media, initially shocked by her defiance, began to rethink their portrayal of her. Journalists who had once questioned her motives now found themselves admiring her courage, her strength to confront the narrative that had long been imposed on her. It wasn't just a statement. It was a shift in perspective, one that challenged the public's perception of who she truly was. In the months that followed, Melania continued to make rare public appearances, but they were different. She wasn't just a figurehead standing beside her husband, playing the role that the world had expected of her. Instead, she emerged as a woman with her own voice, someone who was no longer willing to be silent in the face of public scrutiny. She used her platform to advocate for issues that were close to her heart, such as children's welfare and mental health, and her words carried the weight of her experience. For those who had once seen her as a passive figure, the shift was undeniable. She was no longer just a quiet, composed woman in the background. She had become an icon of strength, defiance, and resilience. And as for the moral of the story, it was clear. In a world that constantly tries to define us, we must all find the courage to walk out of the shadows, reclaim our voices, and stand up for who we truly are, not who others expect us to be. Melania Trump's act of defiance was not just a personal victory. It was a victory for anyone who had ever felt silenced, ignored, or misunderstood. It was a reminder that we all have the power to rewrite our stories, no matter how much the world tries to define us. The media storm following Melania Trump's sudden exit from the event had reached a fever pitch by the time the SUV carrying her sped away from Trump Tower. Every news station and social media outlet was ablaze with discussions, debates, and speculations about what had just transpired. Reporters, bloggers, and political commentators scrambled to dissect her words, actions, and the broader implications of her public display of defiance. For the first time in years, Melania Trump had given the world something to talk about, something raw, unfiltered, and real. Within the first hour, pundits and political analysts were offering their opinions. Some argued that her words had been a deliberate move to rebrand herself, an effort to step out from the shadow of her husband's controversies and carve out her own identity. Others were quick to dismiss her defiance, claiming that it was just a strategic political play, a calculated attempt to stir the pot and keep herself in the public eye. But one thing was certain: Melania had taken the world by surprise. The carefully crafted persona she had maintained for years, the silent but strong figure standing behind her husband, had been shattered in a single, powerful moment. She had shown a side of herself that the public had rarely seen, vulnerable yet assertive, defiant yet poised. As the days passed, more details emerged about what had happened after she left Trump Tower. While the media continued to dissect her exit, Melania had retreated to her private life. The world didn't know what she was thinking, but there were whispers that this moment had been a long time coming, a culmination of years of quietly bearing the weight of public scrutiny. She had, after all, been under a microscope for most of her life. As the First Lady, she had faced intense criticism, often for things that had nothing to do with her own actions or choices. She was frequently overshadowed by her husband's divisive policies and controversial statements. Despite her efforts to carve out her own space, to support various charitable causes, and to champion the welfare of children, she had often been reduced to just the title of wife of Donald Trump. It was a role that she had never fully embraced, even though she had played it with grace and elegance. But the questions that had followed her for so long, about her marriage, her views, her purpose, had finally gotten to her. Her walkout was not just about responding to a single journalist's question. It was a message to the world that she was not merely a footnote in her husband's story. She was her own person, and she would no longer allow herself to be defined by anyone else's expectations. In the days that followed, the world watched as Melania Trump began to take a more active role in her own life. She appeared at a few select charity events, but this time, she wasn't just a figurehead. She spoke openly about the issues that mattered most to her, issues that had long been close to her heart, but had been overshadowed by the noise of politics. She talked about her desire to help children and families struggling with mental health challenges, emphasizing the importance of self-care and emotional well-being. She even made a public appearance to support a global initiative aimed at raising awareness about bullying, an issue she had often spoken about during her time as First Lady. Her actions, however, did not go unnoticed. In the weeks following her walkout, a wave of public support began to swell around her. The media, which had once been quick to criticize her, now found themselves in a position of having to reconsider their approach. Melania was no longer just a quiet woman who stood behind her husband. She had proven, through her actions and words, that she was capable of standing up for herself, of demanding respect, and of making her own mark on the world. But not everyone was convinced. Some of her most vocal critics were still unwilling to let go of their preconceived notions. Political commentators who had once dismissed her as a silent partner were now busy speculating on her next move. Was she positioning herself for a political comeback? Was this the beginning of a new chapter in her life that would see her become more involved in public affairs? Others wondered if she had simply been reacting to years of pent-up frustration, and whether her newfound defiance was just a momentary lapse. As the weeks turned into months, Melania's public appearances remained few and far between. She chose her moments carefully, understanding that the world was watching, waiting for her to slip up or show vulnerability. But she remained steadfast, her presence commanding respect, even in her rare moments in the spotlight. It was clear that her walkout had not been a spur-of-the-moment decision. It had been a calculated act, a deliberate step toward reclaiming her narrative. And in doing so, she had become something that she had never been before, a woman who was unapologetically herself. Yet, as she moved forward, the pressure continued to mount. With each new step she took, the media grew more curious. What was she planning next? What was her ultimate goal? Some saw her actions as the first signs of a future political career, while others believed she had simply walked away from the public eye for good. There was no way to know for sure. One thing was certain, however. Melania Trump had captured the world's attention in a way that no one expected. She had gone from being a background figure, a passive observer of political events, to becoming a symbol of strength, resilience, and self-determination. The journey ahead would be hers to navigate, and the world would be watching every step of the way. But whatever her next move was, it was clear that Melania had made one thing abundantly clear. She would no longer be defined by the narrative that others had written for her. She had stepped into her own story, and this time, it was her voice that would be heard. As the days turned into weeks and the media frenzy surrounding Melania Trump's public departure continued to evolve, one thing became unmistakably clear. Melania's walkout was more than just a fleeting moment of defiance. It was a turning point, not just in her life, but in the lives of those who had been watching from the sidelines, questioning who she truly was, what she stood for, and whether she would ever break free from the shadows. In the aftermath, Melania became a symbol of empowerment, especially for women who had often been relegated to the background of history, constantly overshadowed by the achievements or actions of the men they were connected to. Her words, so simple yet profound, echoed in the hearts of many. I am not defined by anyone's labels. I am my own person. Those few words reverberated far beyond the confines of the event, reaching not just the media or political circles, but millions of ordinary people who found themselves struggling with the same pressures, struggling to be seen for who they truly were, not who others thought they should be. The weeks that followed were a period of reflection and renewal for Melania. She slowly emerged from her private life, not seeking the limelight, but using her public appearances as opportunities to further her mission. She began to speak at charity events again, but with a different tone. The speeches were more personal, filled with the wisdom and strength that came from years of being under intense scrutiny. She spoke about the importance of self-love, the power of reclaiming one's narrative, and the importance of standing up for oneself in the face of judgment. One of her most powerful speeches took place at a global summit on mental health, where she shared her personal struggles with anxiety and depression, issues that had long been close to her heart. She spoke candidly about the emotional toll of constantly being under public scrutiny, of living in the glare of cameras and headlines, and how she had learned to cope with the pressure by focusing on her own well-being and personal growth. Her honesty was disarming, and it allowed others to see her not as a figure of perfection, but as a real woman with flaws, challenges, and triumphs. It was in these moments that the public began to truly understand Melania Trump. She was no longer just the wife of a controversial figure. She was a woman who had been silenced for too long, but had found her voice and was using it to speak for those who felt unheard. Her words and actions resonated with millions of people, and slowly, the narrative surrounding her began to shift. But even as her public image began to evolve, the media remained conflicted. They had expected Melania to fall into the typical political trap, either remaining silent or becoming embroiled in public feuds. But she had done neither. Instead, she had chosen to rise above it all, to reclaim her power and redefine her role on her own terms. The more the media tried to spin her actions, the more they found themselves with nothing to say. There was no scandal to uncover, no hidden agenda to expose. Melania Trump had become her own person, and no one could take that away from her. As time passed, her influence continued to grow. She became an advocate for several causes, particularly focusing on mental health, children's education, and the empowerment of women. Her work in these areas gained widespread recognition, not because of her fame or title, but because of the genuine passion she put into everything she did. She was no longer just a symbol of grace and elegance. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had found strength in vulnerability and had chosen to speak out for those who had been forgotten. Her walkout was not just an isolated act of defiance. It was a moment that sparked a wave of change in her life, a wave that rippled out to those who watched her, listened to her, and drew strength from her. Melania Trump had proven to the world that it was possible to reclaim one's story, to rise above the labels that others tried to impose, and to become more than just a reflection of someone else's choices. In the end, the moral of the story was clear. No matter how much the world tries to define us, we always have the power to rewrite our own story. The narrative that others create for us is not our truth, unless we choose to accept it. We are more than the roles others expect us to play. We are more than the labels others assign to us. Melania Trump's journey of self-reclamation and defiance serves as a reminder that every person has a right to be seen for who they truly are, not who others want them to be. Her walkout was not just an act of personal rebellion. It was a call to arms for everyone who has ever felt marginalized, misunderstood, or overshadowed. It was a message to all. Stand firm in your truth, speak up for yourself, and never allow anyone to diminish the power that lies within you. And for Melania Trump, the journey had only just begun.